BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We are going to be talking about Penn State football. Look at that. It's Penn State Football Show. We're talking about Penn State football. A lot of great stuff coming up today. We are in off-season mode, which means we get to really, one of my favorite things to do is dive into some of those topics, some of those bigger, broader things, and really roll around in some of the details and nuance. But don't worry, there's still news, there's information, there's other things as well. And that's where we're getting to right now to start off the show. We are going to be diving into recruiting as the next big thing on the Penn State recruiting, on the Penn State calendar in general, obviously with a bunch of official visits, very pivotal stuff coming up in May. And with our new schedule, we're going to be getting to a recruiting update each day here on the Tuesday show, the Penn State Football Proper Show. So Sean Fitz, who's sitting there hanging out, he's going to be giving you the news you need to know each Tuesday as we get into the thick of the recruiting season. So Fitz, just give us some quick hitters today on what Penn State fans need to know about recruiting.
Yeah, I believe we're going to ramp this up over the next month because right now it's kind of coaches on the road, a couple of guys setting officials. There's not a ton going on right now, and that's as expected. That's kind of what we talked about in the as the calendar ebbs and flows. I guess this is one of the flows. We'll get some more ebbing toward the end of the month. It's 1 month until official visit. Excuse me, the official visit season rolls around, which is going to the big weekend, or the big start is going to be May 31st weekend. So now that we've got that out of the way. Not a ton going on. T. Frank's got here on a rundown. Ziyare Addison has his official visit locked in. It's the weekend that Penn State's commits are going to be in town. This is something that has been locked in since his last visit. We had actually reported that prior, but he just finally put out the graphic this week, so I figured we'd hit on it. So I'll start with offensive line. That's an interesting spot right now. And if you read yesterday, I talked about Penn State's most wanted recruits on the board right now and where things are a month out from OV season. And there's those three names that we've talked about a bunch with Ziyare Addison, with Michael Carroll, with Malachi Goodman in New Jersey as well. Those are still the names to know. Those are the guys that are coming in for officials. Max Buchanan also coming in later in June from Florida. But beyond that, I think it's really interesting. Phil Troutwine's out on the road right now looking at some guys, and there's some guys on that borderline, some guys that have that check mark next to their name that have offers from Penn State that are going to be sort of, just kind of on the radar, but not squarely on the radar, if that makes sense, over the next month. Nolan Davenport's a guy in Ohio that we've talked about. There's been a couple of other visitors this spring that I think Ryan's going to talk a little bit more about offensive line recruiting this week on the board of Blue White Illustrated, and of course in his content. Speaking of his content, he just put up that Penn State is going to host a committed visitor, a prospect committed elsewhere, for an official visit. Check that out on the site at bluewhiteillustrated.com. So that's kind of the most interesting thing for me from the offensive line standpoint. From there, unless T. Frank wants to give me a chance to get a sip of water here, I'm going to move on to tight end. Penn State offered Matt Henderson at Virginia. This guy I've been watching for a while now. He's one of those receivers that is going to be a tight end at the next level. 6'5" plus, about 200 pounds, kind of similar to Andrew Olish, a little bit lighter. But yeah, the position has moved in that direction, and that you're taking these big receivers and making them tight ends. I know T. Frank's talked a lot about that, but Matt Henderson's a guy they've liked for a while. Good basketball player, fits a lot of what they want to do. Ty Howell went down to see him in Virginia work out and picked up an offer. Now, Hayden Bradley came off the board over the weekend, committed to Ole Miss. Not exactly a surprise there, but he had an official visit set up. So you've got a little bit more on the back end in terms of guys that can potentially fill one of those back roles. And I'll be honest with you, would not be shocked if they went with two tight ends. We're considering Brady O'Hara an offensive lineman at this point, but would not be shocked if they went after two tight ends. I still think they're in a great spot for Andrew Olish. Brody Lennon's going to come in for an official visit. So tight end, as usual with Penn State, a very active spot on the recruiting board.
So that's just a taste of what's coming up this week at on the Blue White Illustrated live show on Thursday. And of course, more information at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Thank you so much for the update on recruiting. Fitz? Today is also the last day for underclassmen to put their name in the 2024 spring window for the transfer portal. We're going to be talking about some of the kind of larger topics when it comes to the transfer portal and stuff later in the BWI mailbag. But right now, some news over the last week. and kind of what Penn State fans should expect. And look, here he is, Nate Bauer, Blue White Illustrated reporter. There was some movement, I believe it was last week, for Penn State in the transfer portal, Nate. So welcome to the show. And
Hello.
Can you tell us what Penn State fans need to know about the latest portal entry from the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, that's a great setup. Devon Townley entered the transfer portal again, and I would anticipate this time it's for real, right? Defensive tackle who last year, I believe, right? Is this the same timeline, Fitz? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the spring portal window entered and then backed out, came back to Penn State. And this year,
I believe he was a winter entry because he was a defensive end, and then he came back as a defensive tackle for spring ball. Just never caught on there. Yeah.
Yep. It, that's college football today, right? Is some guys, you project something for them, and then younger guys come in occasionally, or transfers come in, and occasionally the leapfrogging happens, and opportunity would better be served elsewhere. So that is Penn State's latest there.
It's an interesting player and an interesting storyline at Penn State, Fitz. So Devon Townley is not without talent. This is a guy who I was just looking at, and I remember being very excited about what he brought to the table from a physical perspective coming out of, I think it was Minnesota in 2021. A little bit of a late add to the class, but On3 had him as the 79th overall player. From a physical perspective, he had a very high ranking. That seems like that doesn't make a lot of sense, but I know he's a consensus 4-star player. So Fitz, you mentioned defensive end, defensive tackle convert. Can you tell us what you thought his story at Penn State was, and why he's entering the portal, and maybe what you see for him in the future, if you don't mind?
Yeah, back-to-back sort of misses on that defensive line in a similar profile with him and Rodney McGraw out of Indiana, guys from out of the region that were intriguing. Rodney McGraw was very productive at Elkhart. Devon Townley, a little bit more of a projection, good basketball player, good athlete. They projected him as a defensive end. I would say probably not on the level of the athlete that you needed to be at defensive end at Penn State. And that's,
bigger bodied guy.
Pretty high bar right there. Yeah, obviously. And then tried to move him inside to see if there was something that would take. If you looked at practice, this guy was pretty far behind in terms of defensive tackle development. He looked tall and skinny every time we saw him, and kind of kept waiting for that weight to come along. It didn't come along. So I guess he's just not that sort of body type that's going to end up adding it and be a 300-pounder. He's legitimately huge. He's 6'6", I would say. Really big kid. Moves decently well, but classic tweener if you're going to go in that direction. So I think
the days of the 5 technique are over. It feels like where 277, he'd be a guy that could play a certain role in a certain defense, but nobody really plays that defense anymore, Fitz.
Yeah, it's you're gonna have to find a special, a Nick Tarburton type guy, a specialty, and I think that Nick, a little bit more physical, fits that profile. And you're right, it's sort of moved out. Like we say, there's a role for everybody if you can play. It's just I think the standard is that high on the defensive line. Kind of where it leaves them is, but it doesn't change anything for 2024. But looking at 2025 at defensive tackle, you lose 3, potentially 4 guys, your top 4 guys. Oh boy, Dion Barnes, man, you got it ahead of you next off season. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But it's going to it's going to be a situation where you need somebody to step in. Suffice to say, I don't think Townley was going to be that guy anyway. But you're losing another body there, so you shift your focus there. Caleb Artis, Tariq Blanding, the freshman that they just brought in. It's very interesting to watch that room right now, because it's very clearly, very distinctly two different groups. There's the guys that are going to play, and then there's the guys that you have to develop for next year, or you're going to go to the portal, obviously. But those guys that you have to develop for next year. So I'm very curious to see where that is. It's a conversation for next offseason. They seem pretty okay with it right now.
Nate, I do want to ask you, let's kind of zoom out to the transfer portal at large. We're going to have a little bit more of an extended conversation about generally how the portal has gone during the BWI mailbag, which, by the way, if you're here, you want to drop a question in the chat, or you want to have a comment that you want to get on air, absolutely, we're open for business. But it has not been an active portal for Penn State. Do you expect any 11th hour names? I'm not asking you to report anything, just generally, what's your expectation here for the last day of the portal? Or do you feel confident that Penn State is going to be set if they haven't gone in at this point? They're not going to.
I think that anything is always possible. I don't know if I would describe it as probable. They're like, has there been buzz? Like, have names popped up that have crossed our radar? Yes. But again, this is that last day for the undergraduate side of things. I do think it's and Fitz, like, I'll lean on you guys for to correct me when I'm wrong here, but like the graduate side of things, sometimes it's hard to know where guys are on their academic calendar, right? And their academic progress. And so, there's like, it just feels like we're in an era of college football where there are really like, it's great. This is a quaint, nice rule to say, oh, April 30th is the deadline, but there's no deadlines.
Yeah.
There's no stopping anybody from doing anything that they want. So
this upcoming weekend is Penn State graduation, May 3rd through the 5th. So guys that are graduating, graduate transfers, like, we could be having this conversation on Friday with some breaking news to Nate's point.
But also, I don't expect that. Right? I'm sitting here saying, "Oh no, I'm not expecting anything." Is it possible? Yes. Is it? Yeah. I don't think so. So we'll see.
So what you're looking at right now is like, if you're close to the edge, you have to decide if you want to jump, because if you leave right now, you're not getting your scholarship back. Like, that's. I know it happened with Townley and he came back, but like, this is a situation where you got to manage everything. And I know we say the 85 number doesn't matter, but like, if you're gonna make that jump, you got to make it today, or file the paperwork today. Names could still come out in the next 24 to 48 hours, depending on compliance, whatever. That's more of a disclaimer than anything. But like, if you're in a situation where the poachers are circling and like, hey, Nick Saban, guy that got out because of the transfer portal, that says that they were, what they had the Eagles first round pick at the top of their list in terms of guys they wanted to portal.
Yeah. Quinyon Mitchell. Yeah.
I mean, hey, it's happening. Like, there are guys on Penn State's roster that are on the radar of other schools, but it's going to take, that better be done by today, because you got to figure that out. So you got to make that leap. And I know that they're starting to change the grad transfer window to more fit the everybody else window, which I don't know if that's the right decision or not. That's not my rule to make it. But it's coming to a head. A bit of a dud transfer portal season so far. But hey, 11th hour is the 11th hour for a reason. So we're going to could use some fun at the end here. So I'm with Nate. I don't really expect a ton, but you got to keep your head on a swivel at this time of year.
Mac the Mustard Man says, I'd expect a higher chance of some new name come in than to see any of Penn State's players hit the portal. Any thoughts on that, guys, in terms of, I know they're always looking for talent and to bring people in. Is there any reality to, could they bring anybody in? Nate, do you think that that's a possibility?
Yeah. For sure, because again, it's just, there's no preventing teams like you going out and getting someone after that deadline. It's just a matter of whether or not you have entered yourself to be gotten. So,
right.
It's for sure,
deadline, not an in deadline. Yeah.
Like,
you can recruit guys that are in the portal all the way up to the season. It's just a matter of, sorry.
So, Fitz, I do want to ask you this part though. If you're shopping in the bargain bin, not everyone finds something they're looking for. So has there been anything that Penn State would want at this point? Are there any long-term projects, any young guys, any players that might come in and fill a role, which seems far-fetched, but like from a talent perspective, is that a reality?
People are going to want the guy that's going to come in 2024 and make an impact. And I don't see it. Like, I know we're trying to convince ourselves that these receivers in the portal are better than they actually are, but like, I just don't see it. Now, do you look more at guys that have more time left? Do you look more, you got to take into account, who, how do I say this, especially as a Colorado supporter, which schools are looking at these guys for which reasons? And,
right.
if you're probably on the radar for Colorado, you're probably not on the radar for Penn State. And a lot of these guys that are in the portal or about to jump into the portal or whatever are on the radar of Colorado. That's
and a lot of those guys then leave Colorado pretty quickly, like if you've noticed.
Yeah. Boss. Yeah. But it's really about fit. And yes, I think that you're looking now, and of course we talked about receiver, we talked about linebacker, maybe even offensive line, just because you always need offensive linemen, right? But probably a guy with more years on the back end. And we've seen it in the last couple of years that's not a bad option to go. It's just you're probably not going to get the return on the front end that you want to see or you desperately seek out of the portal.
Nate, any last thoughts on the portal?
No, I look forward to the conversation. I did see the BWI mailbag. I look forward to that part of the conversation. Perfect. So I'll leave it at that.
You're the best. Because we're talking about that coming up in just a little bit. What we're getting to now, I'll admit, this may not be the best one that we've had. It seems like fans are kind of mellowed out, or I've become calloused to the YouTube comment section. But we have a YouTube comment theater after a week and a half off, and just again, as a disclaimer, these are not making fun of anybody. These are, you leave comments in the section. They make me think of things, and then I put them to AI. And I was being very literal this week, I think. So here is the latest YouTube comment theater. All in good fun.
OMG, where did you ever learn to edit video? Stop, start, stop, start. Go back to school. This was worthless. Thomas, you should either get a tube or wear a hat. I kinda wanna see you with a toupee now. BWI, best in the business. Best dollar I ever spent back in 2021. Now I've been here for over 2 years. Good job guys, thanks. Maybe a little long and drawn out. Interesting comments. I unfortunately believe PSU will take a step back this year and possibly miss the playoffs. If this offense doesn't take a step forward and think Franklin's seat starts to become very, very warm, the entirety of the athletic administration needs to be either physically ran out of town or resign. The way they handle NIL and recruiting is not only an embarrassment, it's a testament to their disgusting incompetence. It blows my damn mind we even need to have this conversation. Fire Franklin, as always, and we need a whole new group of people at the top. End of story. Another piss poor season incoming. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Maybe in-state and regional top talent is going to other schools. BCJF is a proven loser in big games.
Yeah, it didn't have the same punch today, Nate. I don't know. We'll see how this goes when here's the thing, Nate. It is always funnier when someone loses their mind in the comments. It's always funnier there. But there wasn't really anybody losing their damn mind in the comments. I guess, people are more chill in April and May.
Yeah, I think I have found myself in fewer, how would I like to frame this, sword measuring contests than...
So I do want to address something from the comment theater as well. I have never in my entire life ever heard anyone seriously give another person the advice, you should wear a toupee.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And Lyndon, said, no offense, I wasn't trying to offend you or anything. And I'm like, I didn't think so. I'm just saying, it is the strangest advice. I imagine the only people who give that advice are people who sell toupees or wear toupees or are a toupee. So, I just imagined that Lyndon is a anthropomorphic toupee trying to convince other people that that's something that should happen. So, again, it's an artistic interpretation on the YouTube comment theater.
Yeah,
that's that. Fitz, welcome back. You missed the really awesome awkward 30 seconds after the comment theater is over. That was heady play by you.
Yeah, that's why I was so I had to get out of here. So, but I did laugh at the guy that said you needed a toupee. That doesn't happen around here anymore.
Okay, so let's get into the story today that we want to really kind of sink into and talk about. Spring storylines that we are resolved, things that we think and are fairly certain we know about Penn State football. What did we check off the to-do list for the Penn State football team heading into the summer? Nate, I want to start with you. What do you think that this is done, signed, sealed, delivered for Penn State football?
This is me on the roller coaster, flip flopper extraordinaire. I said at the beginning of spring practice that I didn't feel convinced that Abdul Carter to defensive end was a surety, that it was absolutely going to happen. And by the end of spring practice, it is going to happen. They've invested this much time. He took enough strides. Right, you're looking this because it's new. It's a different position. There is a lot that goes into it. We've had this conversation 4 times, it feels like, but for 3 of those 4 times, I was of the mindset, well, there's some ramifications to linebacker that could complicate some of that. There are different situations, and I do think that there are different situations where he may still appear as a linebacker. Right, there's a fluidity to him and his talent
and to this defense. There are elements of what Tom Allen was doing, especially last year and the last 2 years at Indiana, where that was a part of the defense, where they had kind of an old school guy that could float between the 2 positions.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, what room will he be spending all of his film study time in? Right, what assistant coach will he be learning under this season? It's going to be Deion Barnes. It's going to be that defensive line room. And I think at this point, right, April 30th, it's like, okay, do I consider this settled? Yes, now I do. He's in there.
Fitz, coming to you. What's the spring storyline that's locked in for you? You know X about Penn State.
So we said coming into the spring that Penn State still played a 4-3 and just tap the brakes on the 4-2-5. Maybe push the gas a little bit more on the 4-2-5 now because of the personnel, because actually in big part to Abdul moving over, that opens some things up because you've got Kobe and Tony Rojas there at linebacker, which you feel pretty good about, and varying amount of depth at linebacker, but you feel good enough about Zakee Wheatley to say that the third safety is going to give you more than the third linebacker. And if a lot of that's going to be matchup dependent, wherever you, whichever team you're facing. But at the same time, with these Pac-12 teams coming in with, Ohio State still on the schedule, you need the variance in your defense. You need the more athletic guy out there that can play in space, that can potentially turn the ball over, which is something that, they continue to strive. I mean, obviously they've gotten better than they were a few years back, but they continue to strive to take the ball away. And I'm very curious. And I know that a lot of it was Tig Brown in terms of like what he was able to do. Like, is that guy back there? Is Winston that guy? Is Wheatley that guy? Or, do you just, have a platoon where you get a couple of interceptions from each guy? I think that's what I'm looking for. And I think that you feel pretty good about that 3 safety setup. I'm curious where King Mack fits in, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, I think we're seeing a 4-2-5, and that's pretty comforting, especially when you look at some of the teams that are on the schedule, like your USCs, your Washingtons, and of course Ohio State.
I really liked what I saw just from some of the things, seeing it at Indiana and then seeing Penn State do it in the blue-white game. It's obviously just a keyhole you're looking through, but the things they can do with that 3 safety defense and system are more trendy in college football right now. If you look at different teams and their coverage umbrellas, and of course, like, it's just entertaining for me, like, to watch the coverage rotation in shells. Nate, were you going to say something? Did I cut you off there?
No, I was going to say 3 top 30 passing offenses from the 2023 season are on the schedule for this coming season. But who knows what Washington's going to look like, right?
Pretty different, I imagine. Who's the quarterback they got? I can't remember. Somebody transferred there, right?
I mean, half their roster is transfers, so yes. Asking me right on the spot here when I'm thinking about Jalen Reed playing linebacker. Yeah, that's
Sam Heward from
No,
sorry.
No. Sam Heward went out and then he went
Brock
to Cal Poly,
Heward.
and now he's out. Another left-handed quarterback.
We're derailing quickly. Nate, what is your next spring storyline while I go look that up?
Cooper Cousins, I think, and maybe I've been pounding that drum a little too hard, but he's going to play, right? Settled that he is a guy who is ready for this stage and in some capacity will appear on Penn State's offensive line this coming football season.
Will Rogers from Mississippi State, by the way.
Thank you.
Because it was bothering me too. And then he went in and he was going to go back in the portal and then he stayed at Washington. So good times.
Yeah. So a little different than Michael Penix, in my opinion.
A little bit.
To the Cooper Cousins conversation fits. What we saw in the blue-white game in terms of his position versatility, is that a long-term option plan in your mind? Or was that necessity given that so many of their offensive linemen were hurt and or veteran rest day during the blue-white game?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the cop-out and say it's a combo because obviously we talked about you don't rotate centers. So if you feel good enough about Nick Dawkins starting, then you're going to need to play Cooper Cousins somewhere and it's going to be guard. So I'm actually very curious to see, and I haven't asked this, if he got any tackle reps during camp. That's a lot to throw at a true freshman early enrollee, but you also threw first-team reps at him at guard. So you've got Sal, you've got Venga, JB Nelson will get healthy again. So feeling pretty good about the interior depth, but you're not going to platoon centers. So, make that was a face. What did I say?
I thought it was David K's comment. I thought that.
No, I'm sorry.
Threw you off.
In my research for finding out who was a video auto played on my speakers and then scared the crap out of me while you were talking. So just the height of unprofessional behavior from me.
I said
that's it.
It was on the heels of I feel pretty good about their interior O-line depth, and I was like, did I miss something here? So
you could have been giving me the equation for faster than light travel, and I would not have known because I was in pure panic mode just then.
All right, we'll work on that.
Yeah. So totally thrown off. No, David K's comment here in the chat says he could see Nate being hired away by ESPN. Nate, some love for you in the chat today.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Like, it isn't in today's, like, that could be an insult. I'm not sure.
On Penn State podcast, you never know.
Yeah, that's for sure. Any other interesting thoughts? You guys, I think, hit the major storylines about what's been settled for Penn State. Any other things that are on the fence? Like, we almost got there, because there's a couple of them, I think, for me, in terms of the run scheme for Penn State. We almost got there watching practice and watching the blue-white game, and then Drew Aller didn't ever run the football during the blue-white game. So, I was all the way to the ledge on, okay, Drew's going to have to run the football, not just more, but like a healthy amount for this particular offense. It's blue-white game. I can't take too much from that, but also we didn't see it. So it's somewhere, it is still somewhere in that gray area for me.
Yeah, that's the issue that we're going to have this offseason, is explaining to people that what they saw in the blue-white game, like whether the weather was what it was or not, like was not going to be indicative of what you see on the field. I mean, you talk to the players afterwards, you talk to some coaches afterwards. They didn't do anything. Like, they didn't do anything. And so talking to the people that we talked to, there's confidence that Andy Kotelnicki has his stuff together. And that's, you're just going to have to take us at our word on that one. I don't know what else to tell you on that.
So let's get to some of that transfer portal conversation Nate was talking about earlier in the BWI mailbag. So this is from Navy Blue over at the Blue White Illustrated Lions Den. And by the way, if you want to get your question on the mailbag and have it featured here on the mailbag, you can join Blue White Illustrated 2 months for $1 with promo code PSU1. It's a special offer just for our podcast and YouTube listeners because you're already here supporting us. Be like Zach in the comment theater. Be a superstar. Join us from the YouTube chat and join us at the Blue White Illustrated message board. 2 months for $1. So this comes from Callie Lyon. He says, on a national level, feels like the quality of talent entering the transfer portal in the spring of 2024 might have been the lowest since the inception of NIL funding. Do you think this is just an anomaly, Nate? Or has there been some evolution that will make schools retaining their best players a trend going forward? What are your thoughts on what Callie Lyon presents to you here?
I think for this, so I like shout out to Shannon Terry, owner, president, chief of the world of On3. He has his finger on the pulse of national trends, and he had a tweet a few weeks ago, I want to say, effectively saying, look, this is right. The first day of the transfer portal was a big nothing, right? There weren't the superstar entries that there had been in some of the previous years, and that his expectation was that this is the manifestation of collectives getting it together, figuring it out, right? Understanding how to manage, right? Roster management, what the market is, right? All of those things that say, okay, look, if I think that there is wiggle room that happens in the spring transfer portal window where players are ironing out with their collectives, with whatever the infrastructure is that works out their package, right? And this is at Penn State and it's everywhere. Saying, okay, right, compensation is X, right? Let's say $200,000. And you divvy that up into 12 months of installments. We think it could be a little bit higher than that, right? And the collective understands what its budget is, what the market value of that player is, and comes back with something of a counteroffer, right? And that process plays itself out. But unless you're wildly undercompensated, you're like, that's a conversation and that's a situation that can iron itself out without having to take that drastic step of going into the portal, right? You don't have to do that at this point. And so I do think that the collectives, broadly speaking, have understood there. It has been a settling of the market that has allowed this to happen.
Nate, I have to clarify something here. By proxy, are you saying Penn State's NIL collective has gotten it together? Because that would be you giving that particular organization a compliment and saying they've done something right. So what's your? Let's.
I'm not.
I just want. I want to get into the details here. And what do you think about that?
No, I mean, they've gotten better. It's inarguable that they've gotten better. And I've said that they've gotten better. I think that there's room to grow? For sure. And I think that they would acknowledge that in a lot of ways. But understand, like, having a better grasp of what's happening outside of your own sphere, right? I think that like, this is a broader conversation that we definitely don't need or want to have in this capacity. But the collective itself at Penn State was set back so far by not having a lead in, right? I mean, you've had this painful growing process over 3 years where they got rid of a collective, right? A collective was established. There were 3 collectives. They combined into one. The name change, a branding change, right? And so all of that has played out rather than some of the other collectives that you see nationally that have really had it together from day one. As the day that it was announced, it was like, okay, this is the plan and they're going forward with it. Penn State didn't have that luxury. byproduct of many different factors. So at this point, though, there is a plan. They are executing that plan. It is organized. They're taking steps toward achieving that. And in fact, they just had an event yesterday on Monday, a golf tournament in Harrisburg that, as I understand, was very successful. So yeah, happy about, like, it's fine.
Are
you just trying to get the best?
Sandy's entrepreneur model did not work.
That wasn't
when you start 2 years behind, this is what you get. Like I agree.
Well, no, but look, there's the other side of it, right? Of her intention and what they were trying to do on the front end was a feedback and a reflection of Penn State's culture, right? And you still see that to this day in terms of the resistance to get behind NIL. They, like, fans are saying flatly, we don't support paying players, period. So her spin and their spin coming out of that was, okay, well, you're not paying players, you're paying them to learn how to be businessmen and entrepreneurs. And there's a way to turn this into a prestigious, like, upstanding citizen type of thing, which is garbage, right? We all know better than that, but it's the one thing that Penn State fans might have gravitated towards, except now we realize 3 years later that that's just not. It didn't matter. It wasn't going to make a difference. Like, Penn State fans, broadly speaking, have been reluctant to get behind what this is.
Fitz, there's the other aspect of this. So there's the NIL, there is, that kind of moving target, it feels like. But what is not necessarily a moving target, I guess I should rephrase that. You're spot on the depth chart. The money's not changing that. So guys that didn't go into the portal, I guess, how do you gauge that aspect of, the Storm Duck situation of, I don't feel like I'm going to get playing time here. I need to find playing time. And yet not a lot of movement from guys who may be a role player. So do the classic tenets of stay and develop still work? And, like, are they still being believed in? It felt like that was all on the verge of collapse a year ago. So how do you feel about, the way that college football was? Is it still sticking around and it's not all just a contract negotiation?
Comfort, culture, and relationships still matter. Now, money's a hell of a tiebreaker. We all know that. Like, it is something that can push out, in, whatever. So you got to trust these guys, and also the fear of the unknown. I believe we talked about that last week or 2 weeks ago. The fear of the unknown of going else somewhere and just essentially starting over. Some guys can do that. Some guys are talented enough to do that. They think Jalen Kimber and AJ Harris and those guys are able to do that. But at the same time, if you're 5th or 6th on the depth chart at Penn State, you're not going somewhere else to start, for the most part. Not go where you want to start. Like, if you're, we won't even throw school tiers in here, but, like, you're in the Big Two right now. Like, that's a pretty good spot to be. Now, having said that, like, you have to iron out all those things that Nate talked about in the spring. And it's better, and this is pure numbers talking. It's better for you. It's better for your collective to iron out, and I don't want to say hometown discount, but, like, you're going to spend more. If you're a collective, you're going to spend more bringing a guy in, and that guy might not be that much better. And so take care of your guys. And I think that's the thing up front when we talk about how Penn State's been able to retain these guys. Take care of your guys, not necessarily in that just throw a ton of money at them, but, like, explain the situation, explain what's going on. And that has helped. And that's why you see 95 guys on the scholarship roster. Like, this can work. That's a lot of guys, and you're not going to keep everybody happy forever. And what's the hilarious part to me is, like, these transfer numbers are lower than pre-portal levels. Like, you have general attrition where you lose 13 or 15 guys every year. And that's not anything that you, like, blink an eye at. Now, Penn State's lost, 6, 7 scholarship guys? I mean, that's pretty remarkable in terms of the era that we're playing in. So you got to be doing something right. But a lot of it comes down to trust. A lot of it comes down to parents and agents. Like, it's a big part of all this. And I think that, we'll give credit where credit's due. Penn State's done a heck of a job at roster retention. It'd be more comfortable if we had this show on Thursday and we got to the end of the window before I said that, before you can freezing cold take me. But I think it's really, like, all of that stuff still exists. Money's a new form, like a new, not sorry, it's not anything new in college football. It's been there, but it is an element that you can talk about on the level now. So it becomes a tiebreaker, becomes something that can swing a vote or something like that. But I think the general idea, and I'm generalizing part of the fan base here, is that every kid's in it for money now. No, not necessarily. There's still a lot of guys that can make this work without the best possible deal. Like, this is not a free agency signing where you're signing for the actual best.
To your point,
dollar.
they're not kids that might be interested in going to Colorado. Like, Penn State is still targeting players who on average, if we're talking about generalities and kind of cutting through some of this stuff, Penn State players are still more in the mold of, I want to all the classic things of college football, more so than just mercenary. We need to get as much money as possible. That is kind of baked into the recruiting strategy, it seems. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I don't need to expand on that too far, but yeah, I think that's the type of kid that they go after.
We have to elephant in the room this, because we have not said his name. One guy left Penn State this year that is and was among the top transfers to go, right? In terms of rankings, like KeAndre leaving was that's a big loss for Penn State. And regardless of what our perceptions are of his talent or what his impact could be at Penn State this season, right? He ended up being one of the quote unquote stars of this transfer portal cycle this spring because of money.
Yeah.
Right. Like, his perception of how he was being compensated by the NIL and the collective was different from what he believed his market value to be. I don't know that that's what ended up transpiring for him. Right.
If you look at the schools that were
final
in
two,
his final two,
No, but what I'm saying is how much of an increase percentage wise did he end up receiving for that transfer? Right. And the reality of the situation for him is Penn State proper was not willing to negotiate that out. Right. There, because of the way it was handled, that wasn't how that worked. But I mean, I do think we're talking. I was talking about this as though that hadn't happened, and it did.
Yeah,
it did happen. Like, Penn State lost a very good player because of what his perception of his NIL value was versus what Penn State believed his market value to be.
Fitz, I'm going to hit you with this question, and then you got to get out of here. So we're going to go to this, and we're going to come back to NIL. So put a pin in this conversation. This one I think is interesting. Navy Blue says, given his lack of availability for most of the spring, do you expect JB Nelson's primary position to be swing tackle as opposed to starting left guard? How much did Nelson play after he left the game against Northwestern with an undisclosed injury? So he's kind of folding in two thoughts here of JB Nelson's long-term availability plus his spring availability, but how do you view his position on the roster heading out of spring?
Well, one of those positions is a starting position, the other's not. So he's going to be competing at starting left guard.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to, I think it's going to be a competition. Venga had a great spring. So I think it's going to be something like that. He's got to get healthy. He did play in 6 games after Northwestern and then 1 play in the bowl game when a helmet came off. And T. Frank and I spent a lot of time trying to find that play. It was in the second quarter, which made no sense whatsoever. But he did play in that game. But yeah, he's got to be healthy, man. He has struggled with injury, and it's a small sample size, but he has missed time. He missed time after that Northwestern game, and he missed spring, or a lot of spring. So he's got to be healthy. That's the number one. But yes, compete at the guard spot. Swing tackle is not a starting position. So like, yes, he will play tackle, or he can play tackle. But like, the priority there is to get him healthy to play guard.
And we'll see. That is part of the offensive line, which I think, going back to our earlier conversation, is one of the unresolved parts of the Penn State storyline heading into training camp, especially with all the players that were not available for spring. So Fitz, thank you so much for today. Appreciate you being here. Go be the taxi for your kids. Appreciate you on the show today. Nate, I want to get this question for you, going back to NIL. Had me at Black Shoes asks, are coaches, or are they going to push for a quick move to an NFLPA style contract for players for their work-life balance, but also for the transfer portal, NIL, collective situation. Do you think this is something they are specifically trying to push for? This is something I know James Franklin has talked about several times publicly in press conferences. Is that just like the ultimate destination, or is this something they're trying to accelerate?
I'm not sure that it matters, right? The people making the rules for years have not been the people living, the profession in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, dude, would it simplify things to have that organization and structure? Absolutely. From the coach player perspective. But there are so many hurdles in between here and there that have to be resolved. You know what the NFLPA is? That's a real question. It's a union.
It's a union. Yeah.
Organized by who?
The players.
Yep.
Right.
You know what college football players don't have, T. Frank?
They don't have a union.
There's no union. Yeah. They're not organized. There's no right. And so until you have that, that puts you right. That's a step that has to happen. That there has to be some way to collectively bargain with these players on the whole. Right. Right. What happens to public monies, universities, Title IX, right? Like all of that is a massive barrier to where this can and probably will end up going. But all of that stuff has to be sorted out on the front end before this becomes a viable option,
right?
To actually have that. So, understanding what was it? Dartmouth's basketball team was considered an employee, right? It's recognized by the NLRB, right? In any case, college football is a long way in terms of. I'm not saying it's a long way from understanding what it should become. I think that's very close. I think that there are visions out there of how this should operate, but you've got a lot of T's to cross and I's to dot before you can get to that point.
It also and this is no different than the NFL, other than the timeline, and the portal into entry, right? So there is a funnel process in the NFL, a draft where I don't know if you know this, Nate. There was a draft this past weekend where players were selected. Teams chose the players that they wanted. College football has kind of this scattershot entry into its membership. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, this is also history, like a long history in the NFL that built over years to have a collective bargaining agreement that unionized all that stuff. But those were adult men. Those were 10-year veterans who, staged lockouts and made these decisions. And not to say that the people in college football, the young men in college football some of them don't have the maturity to do those things. It's harder to do when you're 18 to understand the way of the world and to understand how to do these things than it is for somebody who's maybe 30. 33. Mm-hmm. It feels like there's more barriers and levels to overcome because you can only be in college football until COVID for 5 years at most, a redshirt. So your membership in the union only went so far. And the NFL, you could be, 10 plus years. And it just, those barriers to starting it when people who would be ready to take those leadership roles are then going to the NFL because college football in itself is temporary. It is the temporary way station for, at least in the players' minds, right? So I know that most of them, this is the highest level to get to, but it's not like the majority of them think that way.
Yeah, I don't think active player representation though is right. You hire someone, you have veteran representation that sort of sets the stage and sets the standard of, hey, this is what the market is. This is what is collectively bargained for in terms of television revenue percentages, that kind of thing. What does every university and every program have to work with as a foundational player compensation model. How does that work? That you can figure that out.
Mhm.
I don't think the age thing is the problem that you're describing. If actual agencies, right? There's a
Yeah.
gap between real agents,
Mhm.
okay, and what currently exists in college football.
Yeah.
Current college football is like
But what I guess
your
what
uncle.
you're describing is like a top-down approach from an agency or some governing body that would manage this for these kids, as opposed to a grassroots approach, which I would imagine like you have to have organizers, but a lot of people you have to vote for this. You have to like organize these things, and
Yeah.
usually that's somebody who's a part of the labor force that is driving those things. Because otherwise, it can. Or yeah, and I think that's kind of the sweet spot there is or was a part, for sure.
I just think that CAA, right? Like actual agencies, talent agencies, the big boys aren't getting involved with college football at the level that they will get involved in college football once annual compensation levels are at 25 million plus. Once TV is involved and Pepsi, and, right?
Yeah.
Like once
But
all
doesn't
these big brands,
doesn't that require a union to then ask for a part of the share? The money is there,
100%,
for sure.
100%, and that is probably where this will get to, is forming a union for players becoming part of that union, and then right, it's almost like the on a much different, broader scale, like opting in or not to the EA Sports game.
Yeah.
Right. You like,
yeah.
Okay, yeah, there are going to be a couple guys that don't do it. That's fine. And maybe they will bargain for themselves in some capacity, or maybe it won't even be an option. I'm not sure. I mean, there's just a lot to sort through there.
So what do you think about this question from JC Corrigan? He always asks great questions here in the chat. We don't always get to them, but I love the way he phrases them. Very well thought out. If you had to set the over-under on the number of snaps Beau Pribula takes this year, what would you set it at given Andy Kotelnicki's tendencies? Do you have a general thought here about how many snaps Beau Pribula will get?
I need to look at how many he had last season.
Okay, I can give you in the interim, Kansas
142.
Okay,
out of 957.
Yep. And Kansas last year ran 840 plays. So they ran fewer plays than Penn State.
Yep.
So percentages here matter. Let's just round this out. And this is a little dangerous because I'm giving Kansas like an extra 200 plays. But let's round it out at 1,000.
Okay.
I think 10% is on the generous end. What do you think? So would that be 100 plays? It's dangerous. I'm doing math here on air.
Yeah, that's tough.
Roughly the same, maybe?
Yeah, roughly the same. I think that there were more opportunity, right? Looking at 142 out of, like, he got into 11 games, but
and Drew Aller missed half of one.
It was, I mean, how many were blowouts that offered that opportunity? I mean, in a lot of ways, it was a little bit like Drew's first year behind Sean Clifford, in that you had the occasion to get your backup in the fourth quarter in just about every game last season. So, yeah, I think that the question is really asking us, how intentional is Penn State going to be about playing Beau Pribula? And my answer to that is, I don't know. Honestly,
I think it is. I'll give my thought here of something that I felt strongly about watching what Andy Kotelnicki did at Kansas is like there is a defined package where I think Beau Pribula would fit perfectly. And that is with both of the running backs on the field, and you want to run full triple option, you're running it with Beau Pribula. So how many times did they run 22 personnel last year or two backs? You put him in those situations, and I would scale it down a little bit, because they did that with their starting quarterback at Kansas last year. So you're not going to be maybe leaning into that. And that's kind of where I got to 10%. It was the idea of, I have in my head a defined role for Beau Pribula in this offense, but that might not be what Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State think.
Yeah.
Here's a question I want to get to. This is, I think, a big question in almost all Penn State fans' minds. What do you think Penn State's place is in the new Big Ten and playoff format? Is it realistic for fans to believe that Penn State can compete and win a national title and conference championships? Will new powerhouses, USC and Oregon specifically coming in, push Penn State down on the totem pole? So, does Penn State have now a clear path to the college football playoff because there are more players in, or are they now still in the exact same spot because they have more competition? You have talked more, Nate, about that competition and the increased level of difficulty on the schedule than I think anybody else. So where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I think that they're in roughly the same spot. I think it's a tougher schedule than it. I mean, some of it's luck of the draw, right? If Penn State had to play either Michigan or Ohio State this year, you would much rather play Michigan, right? Even on the road,
yeah,
than playing Ohio State at home this year.
Yeah.
So, right, like, is that unlucky? Yeah, probably. You get Washington at home after again, like referencing the beginning of the show, who knows what they're going to be this year? Southern Cal out there, who knows what Southern Cal is going to be this year? There's a lot of uncertainty. I do think that there's going to be more, parity, maybe, right, year to year. The way that the divisions worked themselves out, Ohio State and Michigan had avenues to dominance.
Yeah,
that one, because of where they stood in the conference. I think that the West, right, those teams in the West will be quickly exposed, right? The notion that you had over the last 10 years, 0 West winners of the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, and the mystique of the Big Ten defense, I do think, is also going to change, where Iowa can have a prolific defense, and then you go, but was it, or did they face terrible offenses?
Correct.
And they are good. Like, Penn State has a good defense. Iowa has a good defense. But statistics, which is what we're talking about when we measure and compare, those might change. We had the conversation, I'm sorry to cut you off, but this is something that came up this weekend, talking about Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, and Daquan Hardy not going in the NFL draft until King was drafted in the 7th round. Dixon's injury, that's a whole separate conversation. But then it got into the defense wasn't all that good against good teams because they didn't hold Ohio State and Michigan to 10 points, is the point of some of the people who have a opinion about defense that is rooted in 1989. Kind of it stopped developing there without the, I think, perspective that rules have changed and football has developed. So teams are doing things that are different and prevent you from, a 10-7 win that often. And I mean, that's my opinion here, but that's also the opinion that I think is going to be very angry that Penn State is allowing 30 points to USC. And as long as the offense can score 35, they've won that game.
Yeah, look, there's all kinds of things that go into it. How many possessions are there per game, which is now reduced, right, based on the clock rules. Ohio State won a 20-12 game against Penn State. That's as close as it gets to what you're talking about.
Yes.
Michigan won a 24-15 game. That was fairly close to what you're talking about too, in a game where Michigan ran the ball 31 straight times. So we're not talking like the best games that Penn State had on the schedule last year actually were just the worst kind of football that you can watch.
Or is it the best?
Is it the best? But Oregon's not going to allow for that to happen.
Yeah.
Southern Cal's not going to allow for that to happen. It'll be interesting to see if some of these traditional teams in the Big Ten evolve with that and make a play, right? Look, there's a back half of this argument saying you might want to be a sexy, flashy offense, but like basketball, there are only so many of those humans alive, right? Like a 7-foot center, right? Zach Edey. There, you can only play that way. Only so many teams are going to have the luxury to play that way. What can you actually rely on? Your defensive system. Penn State happens to be one of those programs that is flirting with having those superhumans who can execute as a quarterback, tight end, running back, wide receiver. They're not there. They're not, but are they trying to be? Yes, they are. They're trying to emulate that. So we'll see how I do think that I think that Michigan is in store for a step back for sure, right? The way that the program operates and some of the reluctance of their fan base to get behind NIL will be interesting to see. I think Ohio State is poised to continue to be a steamroller. They do not care. That fan base is totally behind it. They are all in, and they are spending like they are all in. Oregon is spending like they are all in. So, right, like to me, if I'm actually breaking down the pecking order, I think Ohio State is first and will remain first until somebody knocks them off. And even then, they're going to just continue to ramp it up until they get there. Oregon, to me, is the clear threat for number 2, I think, in the Big Ten for years to come.
AG Duke, who is a superstar of the YouTube comment theater, brings it here in the show. He says, if NIL is the only driver of success, Texas would win the national championship every year. Culture and coaching remain the difference maker.
They just got to the playoff.
Yeah. but also he makes a fair point. There are teams. Texas does have Steve Sarkisian, who is a good coach. They finally stopped getting in the way of their own success and found a guy who has an offensive mind to have a good system. Penn State has been having a difficult time finding the offensive mind to consistently run a good system at Penn State. You look at when they've had success, like the defense, they figured that out. Finding the offense coordinator and keeping him in-house long enough to have sustained success. Nate, has Penn State gotten their number one option as an offensive coordinator? I don't want to talk about this year in case there's any sort of but historically, when you are moving on from a guy who's had success at Penn State, has Penn State been able to go out and say, I don't care what the price tag is, get the guy who's going to craft the best offense for us in this next iteration? Have they been able to do that from a money perspective?
No.
That's a huge part of it.
Yeah, not just money, but commitment, right? What are you willing to do? Do you guys and no offense to Rick Rane, I think he's a good coach, and I think he is, in a tough situation, but having some success as a head coach. But if anybody thinks that he was the top choice coming off of back-to-back New Year's Six bowl appearance, right? 11-win seasons back-to-back, that's not what that was, right? That was a limitation on budget, staff pool, all of that stuff that put Penn State in that situation. So Mike Yurcich is a little bit of a different story. I think that there was more room there. And obviously Andy Kotelnicki, I think, is right. He was one of a small group of guys that Penn State went after, and they got one, right? So if Penn State had been I think I would have a different conversation about this if it was, Penn State identified 3 and from the get-go, and Andy Kotelnicki wasn't part of that conversation, that they got Andy Kotelnicki, and everybody's happy about that, but he wasn't part of the 3. He was. Right. And so that's, to me, this is where James Franklin's hiring, you can be more critical of it now. Yeah. Right. The barriers of entry for what the budget is, how you can solicit guys to come into the program, that has changed. Pat Kraft has been supportive to that end and has opened up the doors to say, hey, look, this is this is what it takes. James Franklin, this is your hire.
Yep.
Go make your hire. Go recruit this person to become part of your program and lead this offense.
Yeah. And I think the parallels between the two situations with Texas, who's spending all the money to get all the guys and gets the wrong guy, and then Penn State, who's got, I think, 3/4 of the structure in place, and the offensive coordinator, the most expensive, most interchanged part of a football team outside of the head coach, which is an obvious thing. That's Duke's point, is that the head coach is the problem, but we've seen them successful. We've seen them be successful. Even last year, and I know that this is a totally different conversation, they did win 10 games last year, right? I didn't fever dream that, Nate. They did win 10 games.
They did.
Whether that's good enough for you or not, I think on the whole, that was a winning season. Like, from a statistical perspective, it is not a failure in the strict sense. You can still see that this is a successful program from a bunch of different levels. But is it the most successful? Is it going in the forward direction? Like, they have not been able to go in a linear direction forward because of the things we're talking about, and obviously on the field issues.
Yeah, there is a lot to this conversation, but the purgatory of the last 2 years, I think, is rooted in the reality that other than Utah, right? And Utah's just so unsexy, right? If you could translate Utah to Southern Cal, if the Rose Bowl win it was against Southern Cal and Southern Cal was Southern Cal that year, then maybe we're having a different conversation. Forget Southern Cal. If it had been Oregon, it's a different conversation. You could point to something and say, okay, Penn State lost its game, right? Auburn not being Auburn, that played a part in people's perception of Penn State football, because Penn State could not win 4 games against 2 programs ranked in the top 5 of the country every time they played. Absolutely fair criticism. Like, that's a huge thing. The issue with Penn State is that it didn't have opportunities to play teams ranked 15th, right? Comparisons were nowhere to be found on the schedule. And so, you ran up 20 wins over 2 seasons, but who were those wins against? Where did the bulk of that success come from? That's where I think a lot of the frustration is rooted, beyond the Michigan and Ohio State stuff. It's okay. You've had success, but what has it come against? And where do things fall this year? This year is, to me, a massive litmus test, because I think they can have a very good team this year, still win 10 games. And that 10 wins this season is a massive world away in terms of accomplishment from 10 wins last year. That's the reality.
Thank you for putting that nuance in that, because I think that's necessary as well. It's not positive, it's not negative. It's just this is the information, these are the context for those questions. We are well over time, but I want to make sure when we've got people's questions from the BWI mailbag over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com that we get those on air. Poncho570 says, who will be under the microscope more this upcoming year on the D squad, the defensive tackles or the offensive tackles? That's a great question. I think that's a very great question, but I'm going to go, Nate, with defensive tackles here because, there's no guarantee that Drew Shelton is moving on after this year. There's a lock stock guarantee that all but Zane Durant has to move on after this year at defensive tackle. So I would say the D tackles, because the offensive tackles, there's a lot more flexibility with those young guys having a little bit more of a runway. They don't need to be contributing next year. You got anything else to add to that?
I think the ends will matter, because Amin's going to be gone. Ziyare is going to be gone. Right. So you have those top 2, the sexy guys to talk about with Abdul and Nittany. We'll see about Nittany. I think Abdul's probably a fairly safe bet to move on after the season, but maybe Nittany comes back for a 4th year. Right. And then it gets interesting. I mean, I think Jameel Lyons becomes an obvious heir apparent so maybe you still have 2 very good starting defensive ends, but then it gets interesting at defensive end for sure.
I guess the other thing is who's going to be on the D squad. We don't for the D line. At that
That's the
position,
thing is
we don't know that yet.
Yeah.
Nate, thank you so much. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, whatever Nate is cooking up this week, you can go sign up and you can check out his premium content. Basketball, there's a lot of information that's been coming out about basketball. We're going to be trying to get a hoop show here in the next couple of days, so be on the lookout for that. But as always, if you want the information, subscribe and go into the premium content so you can get Nate's unfiltered thoughts about all this stuff. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. I'm done holding him hostage. We'll be back tomorrow with more on the BWI Live Show.